Has your employer told you that everyone needs to return to the work site? Have you and your company had some difficult conversations about what your working arrangement is going to be? Are you in a leadership or management role and have had to have some uncomfortable conversations with your team about this? Many mid career professionals face these questions, and some are having difficulty deciding what is best for them and their careers. And if this is you, my friend, you are not alone. In this episode, you are going to meet Marcelle Yeager. She's an executive career and job search expert who joins me to discuss ways to increase employee engagement and retention. Whether you're leading a team or you're dealing with an organization struggling with what work looks like right now, this is a conversation you will not want to miss. Marcelle brings a fresh and welcomed approach to ensuring everyone is heard and validated while still holding people accountable. Welcome to episode 146 of the Mid-Career GPS podcast. I'm your host, John Nerrill. I'm here with you each week to help you find a job you love or love the job you have by using my proven four-step formula. One of the many reasons I do this podcast and bring you fantastic guests like I am today is to make creating your mid-career GPS easier. The first step to building your mid-career GPS is all about preparation. And today's conversation that addresses remote working agreements, the future of remote work, and leading during these interesting times is something I know will help you. But if you're looking for something more, I've got a free guide for you. On my website at johnnerrill.com, you can download a free copy of my guide, 5 Mistakes Mid-Career Professionals Make and Need to Stop Doing. You'll get a great resource with relevant and practical tips to help you start figuring out whatever is next for you in your career. Plus, you'll be enrolled in my email community where you'll get more leadership and career information and tips to help you build your mid-career GPS. You can check the show notes or visit johnnerrill.com to get your copy of your free career guide. Now, since 2012, Marcelle Yeager has reshaped career narratives for mid to executive level professionals to get them into a job they love. Her clients land jobs in Fortune 500 companies, consulting firms, nonprofits, and the government. Before starting her career development-focused company, Marcelle Yeager worked in strategic communications at APCO Worldwide, a Washington, D.C. public affairs firm, as well as Booz Allen Hamilton, in addition to the Department of Defense and the Department of State. She launched Career Valet in 2012, which helps professionals reshape their narratives to get them into a job they love. For 3.5 years, she simultaneously ran Serving Talent, a boutique recruiting firm for top U.S. military and diplomat spouses. Marcelle holds an MBA from the University of Maryland, College Park, and a BA from Georgetown University. She's a former weekly contributor to the U.S. News and World Report on Careers blog, clearancejobs.com, and has been featured in various publications, including Money Magazine, Monster, and Flex Jobs. I invited Marcelle on the podcast to discuss ways mid-career professionals can increase employee engagement and retention, especially in the virtual workplace. Whether you're a virtual employee or leading a team who's virtual, there is no question you are going to get a lot of great tips from this episode. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Marcelle Yeager.
Hi, I'm Marcelle Yeager from Career Valet, and we help mid to executive level professionals reshape their career narratives to get them into a job they love. We've been doing this for over a decade now and work with professionals across industries and job titles. And I started it as a portable career to help people as my family and I move around the world.
We're going to get into your worldly adventures in a moment, but Marcelle, I love asking my guests, what did you want to be growing up?
I wanted to be a teacher first, and then I decided maybe that's not for me, and planned to be a writer, primarily a fiction writer. And it's always in the back of my mind still. And I guess that's the sense of what I do today, but have not yet written a book.
When you think about writing that book, even for fun, um, what kind of uh, what kind of fiction or story background is it?
I have too many ideas. I try to record them every once in a while. Um, I think I'm really interested in sort of, human relationships and people to people relationships. So I think it would probably be something around family or friend relationships, not exactly sure. But also always dabbling in the idea of making certain career related blog posts and articles longer form and turning those into a book. So it's always a tension between those two very different topics.
I love it. I was sharing with somebody earlier today that when I had gotten out of college and I thought about writing a book, I wanted to sit in a back corner booth at a diner in New Jersey where I grew up and write about stories that happen at the diner between midnight and 6 a.m. on a weekend.
I
I thought,
love
oh,
that
that would be
idea.
such a fun book to write and have fun telling the stories and embellishing and everything like that. I never wrote it, but if somebody out there wants to take the book and run with it, just give me a credit somewhere. I'd appreciate it. But I just thought that would be kind of fun. Writing gets a lot of stuff out of us. And you certainly have pivoted oftentimes in your career. Can you give us this high level arc or overview of your career path that takes you to where you are at mid career today?
Sure. So when I started, well, actually, I should say, when I left college, I had studied language, Russian language, actually, and business. And I thought I wanted to get into some kind of international business or helping US companies move internationally. That was my intention. So what I did is I moved abroad for 2 years with my now husband and worked for private companies, and then returned to Washington, D.C., and fell into communications, which made sense because I was working with clients. But instead of helping them set up abroad, I was helping them position themselves in the United States. So the opposite of what I thought. That was a pivot there. And the great thing there, again, back to the writing, right, was that communications utilized my writing skills. So that pivot made sense, even though before that I had no idea what communications was. And from there, I thought I really want to become an expert in something. And I transitioned to the federal government, not for very long, for just over a year, in fact, and was able to use my language skills and build some expertise. But again, I was drawn back to the creative side of communications and writing, and decided to switch back and do that again and work with clients, and went to a firm that did that before I started my current company, Career Valet.
It goes without saying that there is such power in writing and language and communication. But what I have found, and it's funny because I've actually had conversations with a very dear friend of mine who also happens to be the editor of both of my books as we talk about writing skills in the workplace, is that it can sometimes be brushed off as I have an app that can fix it, or I don't need to spend that much attention to it. In your practice and working with your clients, how much do you talk about their communication and their language, especially as they're making a career pivot?
I love this question because it's been coming up a lot lately. And I think one of the reasons is that so many people are working remotely, right? So we're seeing, I think that it's almost like people are having a moment where they forget, and I'm guilty of this as well, even being an extrovert, where you forget what it's like to interact with people, whether it's in person or in a group setting, right? Or just forcing yourself to get out there and put yourself out there like you used to do all the time at events and so
Yep.
forth. So I'm noticing that we're coaching clients a lot more now on, yes, you're great on paper, but you need to also talk through, you know, be yourself really and communicate that, because otherwise they're not going to know you can get along well with people or talk to clients or be someone they want to be with, in meetings throughout the day or conferences and events, and be leading a team or whatever it is. So we're coaching people a lot on those communication skills. And in terms of that pivot as well, right? It's like, if people are moving to a higher level or completely changing their career, it's helping them figure out, okay, how can I talk to this employer in the way they need to hear from me about what they want, right? Not what I want, but what they want to see. How can I talk to them in that way? Or if it's moving up, how can I position myself in that more senior level, role through the way that I'm speaking and reacting.
We're coming up on the 3-year anniversary of what is often termed as the start of the pandemic. And we've seen so much happen with how everything is going. That's a whole other podcast in and of itself, which I'm not going to get into. But my question to you around that, though, is what have you seen in terms of the workplace skills, leadership, or connection skills that people need to start paying more attention to now as a result of the pandemic?
Yes, that's great. Because something we think about a lot here for that reason. And the first thing that always comes to mind is really flexibility, because I think a lot of us, might say that we're flexible, but in reality, we do have, everyone has boundaries, right? And things they're not comfortable with, and that's totally fine and should be, you should be transparent about it. But flexibility in terms of, being willing to try something new, help out in a different area, to change your schedule, right? Which is hard, especially when you're working from home and you have other demands. But that's key. And I think it's something employers are definitely continuing to look for. And then in terms of other skills, the communications, again, is a big one. And I feel like I'm a broken record saying it again. But I think over communication is necessary now, to be quite honest. I think if you're not communicating enough, people are wondering, oh, what's he or she doing? Or why haven't I heard from them? Or I have no response to this email. Did they even receive it? Right? Or why aren't they picking up my calls? Things like that. I think you have to be more intentional about actually asking your boss and your peers how they prefer to communicate, and then making sure that you're doing it regularly, right? Is it on a chat? Is it on Slack? Is it a phone call, an email update every week? It could be a lot of different things, but I think those two are super important.
So staying with that for a moment, Marcelle, when we talk about how we show up as a communicator and we set those ground rules for what is the best avenue of communication with someone, you talked a few minutes ago about over communicating. And I just want to go back to that for a moment. And how would you define over communication?
I think it sounds negative, right? But I think where I'm coming from is we often think we're communicating and we're not. So it's almost like pressing the gas pedal on communication, because really looking at, okay, what am I doing? Am I doing enough? And to me, it's like, I'm kind of old school in this way, and I know that, but I think that, my colleagues agree with me. We talked about this recently, that, you need to respond to messages within 24 hours. Even if it's, hey, I don't have time for this right now, or I'll get back to you in more detail later, but thank you for your message. Just acknowledging when people communicate to you, giving that back to them, right? And then making sure, like I said, like if you establish that, your boss likes to have an update every Friday, make sure you send that report in whatever format they want every Friday. on time, right? And just making sure also that you're communicating with your colleagues, because I think in the end, right, everybody wants to be understood. That's kind of like, as a human, right, this is kind of the ultimate goal and feeling we all need. And that's true at work as well. And so I think you also should think about, am I checking in with my colleagues? Am I, especially if you're leading a team, but even just your colleagues, right? Asking them how they're doing and, how are things going? I think some people are afraid to do that, but it really goes a long way.
For those people who are 100% remote or they have a hybrid working arrangement and they are managing or leading teams with a remote staff, what are some of your tips aligned with communication to help leaders be better at building their teams virtually?
So this is a tough one, right? Because it's hard when you don't see people in person. It's a very different way to build a relationship. But I think that those check-ins are key. And it's checking in, right, about how things are going with work as well as how things are going personally. And again, you don't have to like dig too deep into all the personal details of all of your staff, but having one-on-ones, scheduling regular one-on-ones, making sure you are asking them how they are, making sure you're thanking them for the work they're doing on a regular basis is a big one, right? Because again, that understanding and the gratitude can go a long way. And I think more formally, it's important to establish with each of your team members what their goals are, right? Because in this environment, it can be really hard to see what's going on behind the scenes, and you don't have the benefit of the water cooler in the office. So talking them through, like sitting down and saying, what are your goals? How can I help you get there? Are there things you want to do in the next, what do the next 3 months look like, 6 months to a year? And putting them down on paper to make sure that everyone's held accountable. And if it's, that also makes it clear in terms of promotions, what are the things that your staff member needs to do in order to reach those goals? It shows that you care. It shows that you have, the foresight to think about their professional development and that you're trying to help them out in doing that. And then actually following through on that, right? Like having a check-in maybe every month on the goals. How are things going? What are the things we need to work on? Are there other growth areas we need to look at, things to improve? And just staying, again, communicating and staying on track to make sure that you don't push those meetings as much as possible, right? You hold the times for those, don't change them. I know these things get pushed back, including appraisals and, reviews and things. And it's so important these days, if you want to retain people, to keep those things on the calendar as much as possible.
One of the things I appreciate about what you're sharing is this idea about consistency, especially from a leadership lens. So when our team members can expect that we're going to show up for that weekly check-in call, or we're having a team meeting, and these things that we have established to be norms are going to consistently happen over and over again, it creates that sense of routine, but also comfort. We know what we're going to get. One of the things that I've been hearing lately, and it has come from both from people I'm talking with, be it clients or not, but also in terms of my network, is there seems to be a little bit of a pushback in terms of what I will describe as virtual behavior. And one of those things is cameras always on. I'm curious to know from you, both from the employee side and a leadership side, what your take or perspective is on, should cameras always be on?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think that it doesn't always have to be that way, right? I think in some instances it makes sense. Like if you have a full team meeting or say like a one-on-one meeting with someone, it makes sense to have it on because it's as if you're meeting face to face, right? Or with a client, of course, right? But if you have some internal meetings where you're just brainstorming ideas or, you just had to have a meetup to work through some things, I think it's okay not to have people on if they're engaged and participating. Because one thing that really bothers me, and I don't know if this is what you're also getting at, John, but I've heard a lot recently about companies, monitoring people, like, are they actually doing the work? And, checking online and logging people's activity and things like that. And to me, that's the formula for losing people, right? Right
Sure.
there. And so I have a problem with people saying, well, your camera has to be on, so I know you're there. If people are engaged and participating and doing their work, you need to trust them, right? That's just my feeling. I don't know how you feel about the cameras, but
Yeah, I think when all possible cameras are on, to your point, especially if we're meeting one on one or if we're having a team meeting and things like that. But where I have had to check in with my thoughts, and it goes back even to when before I started my practice full time and I had people in other offices and things. I had this defensiveness about myself when if somebody came to a meeting and their camera wasn't on, I was like, what are they doing? Like, are they folding laundry while they're in a meeting? Are they making dinner? And it was always these excuses that was really more about me and not about them. And so I've evolved in the sense of saying, okay, there's got to be a circumstance or situation behind why their camera's not on. Now, in an ideal situation, I'm informed. Like as a leader, I would want to be informed as a heads up and say something like, look, we're having some work done around the house. My camera's going to be off. My microphone's going to be off unless I'm speaking. Thank you for understanding. Those one-offs create some great trust building and rapport between a remote employee and their leader. I believe, I think that's just partly about being transparent and saying, hey, look, this is a situation I'm in. I hope you understand it. I'm here, but I'm doing the best I can, and I'll still deliver. I think when it becomes habitual, and as leaders, if we give everybody a pass all the time without checking in to simply say, hey, you know what, when we're having a team meeting, part of it is we really want to see everybody. Is there a concern about, why you don't have your camera on every time we have a team meeting? Those would be one-offs and those kind of conversations to see what's going on there and see if a possible accommodation or understanding can be reached in that way.
I love that idea. And I think too, right, as another example would be if you're not feeling well, right? And you just don't want to be on the camera that day, but you got to be there to listen. But like you said, talking to your boss about that and saying, like, this is the situation, you're right. It does. It builds trust. And that's the most important thing.
Yeah. And I love the example you used as well earlier, because there are companies out there that are putting these edicts in about how everybody's got to have their camera on and, why were you away from your desk for 12 minutes and things. But we have to remember too, that has to apply to the leader as well. If I'm managing a team remotely, nobody wants my camera on when I'm eating egg salad. And I don't want to see anybody else's camera on while they're eating egg salad. You know why? It's messy and it's gross. I don't want to see it. Okay.
I'm with you 100%. Lunch meetings, we don't need the camera.
No, my clients, I work with my clients one-on-one. We have this running joke, and I'm like, look, if we're meeting at a time, you need to eat something or whatever, fine. My accommodation is no egg salad. I do not want to see it.
I think there's a lot of things we could throw in that category.
Yes. But I mean, these are the challenges and the hurdles that are happening, and we're having these different conversations, especially now as we are into the new year and we're seeing companies admittedly struggle and wrestle and pivot with what their return to the worksite situation is going to look like. Do you have any thoughts around where things might be headed as far as the status of remote work goes moving forward?
Unfortunately, I see a lot of companies still requiring people to come into the office. And even the fact that they're ending up losing people because of this declaration, they still don't seem to get it, right? Like the traditional model still holds. No, we need people in the seats in the office, even if there's no reason for it. I think over time, this is going to have to change because people are leaving and they're not retaining, some very large, well-known companies continue to do this, and they are losing people left and right and having to seek new employees, new candidates. So I think that will be an issue. And I think something companies really need to focus on now is how to engage people better from the start, right? Like even through their hiring processes, I think they need to think through, okay, how are we really going to first, for their benefit, test for some of these soft skills like the flexibility and the communication. But, moving forward, they have to really look at how do we treat the candidates? How do we present our work environment to these candidates? We need to be transparent about anything from salary, which we're seeing more, right? But that needs to expand, in my opinion, to, everything about what the work is really like. Is it really hybrid? Is it remote? Is there an option? What's the travel like? These things need to be upfront. This is what candidates need to hear. It's what they're demanding, and it's going to make the company's employers' lives easier as well, instead of spending all this time hiring people who aren't satisfied with the end result. Does that make sense?
It does. And it brings up this question for me. So, what is the number one thing you are either hearing from people or it's your expert wish that companies focus on to help retain their top talent better in 2023?
I would say, the best thing you can do is really have a system together that you hold your leadership accountable for. Or if you are a leader who can make this happen, do it yourself. Where all of, the future is very clear. So what does my future at the company look like? Breaking down those goals, as we talked about before, into maybe quarterly goals or even shorter goals, depending on your industry, and holding to that. I think that, you talk about employee engagement and making people come to social events and things, but from the employer's perspective, to retain people, you need to understand what this employee's career trajectory looks like. And if things aren't working in one section at one point, when there's a check-in, maybe they need to pivot to another department or shadow another team or colleague and see if there's a better place for them. But making a system to allow those opportunities to happen, I think, is number one.
I appreciate that. And it ties in so beautifully with what building that mid-career GPS is all about. And it's about finding that fit, and that fit that perfectly aligns to your needs, your career satisfaction, where you get to do your best work, why that work is important to you, where it's a value add to an employer or even to yourself as a business owner, and what that specifically looks like. There is no question that as we go through this year, and perhaps even more so than in years past, this whole concept of what employee retention is going to look like will be far bigger and bolder than just a conversation around compensation. And I thank you for putting a lens on that for us today. Yeah.
I agree 100%.
Well, Marcelle, we're going to start wrapping up here. And so I'm curious from you, for everybody who's listening, what advice would you give them to help them build their mid-career GPS?
The absolute best thing you can do is start talking to people. So I know it sounds very basic, but I see people pivoting all the time mid-career simply by reaching out, getting introductions to people, finding out about other career spaces and other fields, other companies, other industries. It's conversations. It really is. And the same goes even internally. If you're looking to stay with your company, same principle, right? Find the people who are doing the things that you have interest in, set up a conversation, hear what it's about, and then go from there. I mean, I can't tell you how I've used this as well as our clients, but people I thought I would never return to introduce me to somebody or have a conversation about where they're at for my own interests. It works wonders, and just continue to build those relationships because you don't know where it can take you.
That's such great advice and a constant reminder that we still need to keep building and growing our network. So thank you for that. Marcelle, if people want to connect with you, learn more about you and what you and your company at Career Valet do, I'm going to turn the mic over to you to tell us all the good things.
The best place you can find us is at careervalet.com. That's one word. And on there too, we have a free resume handbook with a bunch of different tips, how to quickly improve your resume. So I encourage you to download that. That's free on there. And you can also feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I don't think there's anyone else with my name that I've found on there. So it's pretty easy to find me.
Well, I will make sure all of that is in the show notes for everybody to go back and check out. Marcelle Yeager, thank you so much for spending some time with us today on the Mid-Career GPS podcast.
Thank you, John. I had a great time talking to you.
I did too. And just to recap for everybody, if there's one big takeaway I want our listeners to get from today's conversation, it is about retention. What is it that you are asking from your company or you need from your company more specifically in terms of retaining you as a top talent within your organization? And how are you advocating for yourself and showing up to protect and promote your brand, whether it be with this current organization or maybe a different one, maybe next week, next month, later in the year, or even next year? That is all part about building your mid-career GPS. So my friends, remember, we build our mid-career GPS 1 mile or 1 step at a time, and how we show up matters. Make it a great rest of your day. Thank you for listening to the Mid-Career GPS podcast. Make sure to follow on your favorite listening platform. And if you have a moment, I'd love to hear your comments on Apple Podcasts. Visit johnnerrell.com for more information about how I can help you build your mid-career GPS, or how I can help you and your organization with your next workshop or public speaking event. Don't forget to connect with me on LinkedIn and follow me on social at John Nerrell Coaching. I look forward to being back with you next week. Until then, take care, and remember, how we show up matters.